The cold was a constant companion. It was a thief that stole the feeling from her fingers and a beast that gnawed at her bones. Alara knelt on the stone flags of the great hall, the icy water from her bucket seeping through the thin wool of her trousers. Each circular motion of the rag was an agony, her knuckles raw and split, protesting the harsh lye soap and the relentless chill. They called her the Ghost of Greyfang, a whisper of a girl who haunted the edges of their boisterous pack life, an omega, less than nothing. She was an orphan, a bundle left on the pack's doorstep 18 winters ago, with nothing but a thin blanket and a name scrawled on a piece of hide. Alpha Borin had allowed her to stay, not out of kindness, but for the utility of an extra pair of hands that required no payment beyond scraps from the kitchens. She was a debt that could never be repaid, a stain of otherness they could never quite scrub out. Her existence was a chore, both for her and for them, worthless. The word was a brand on her soul, reinforced with every dismissive glance, every sneer, every time she was made to wait until the last of the pack had eaten before she could take the cold leftovers. She kept her head down, her eyes on the floor. To be invisible was to be safe, or at least safer. A pair of fine leather boots stopped just beside her bucket. Alara froze, her heart giving a painful lurch against her ribs. She did not need to look up to know who it was. The scent of winter roses and smug satisfaction always preceded Lyra. "Still scrubbing, little mouse?" Lyra's voice was like honey laced with frost. She was the Alpha's daughter, beautiful and cruel, the jewel of the Greyfang pack. "You missed a spot." Alara's eyes darted to the floor. It was immaculate, the gray stone gleaming wetly in the light from the high windows. There was no spot. There never was. This was just part of the game. She mumbled, her voice a dry rasp. "My apologies, Lyra. I will do it again." Lyra laughed, a tinkling sound that made Alara's skin crawl. "Oh, I am sure you will." There was a sudden, deliberate movement. Lyra's boot connected with the side of the wooden bucket. Icy, dirty water sloshed over the rim, drenching Alara's front from her chest to her knees in a shocking, breathtaking deluge. The cold was so intense it was like a physical blow. It punched the air from her lungs. She gasped, doubling over, trembling uncontrollably. "Clumsy thing," Lyra tisked, though her eyes danced with malicious glee. "Now you have to clean that up, too. And yourself. You stink." She turned, her fur-lined cloak swirling around her, and walked away without a backward glance, her laughter echoing in the cavernous hall. Alara remained on her hands and knees, shivering violently. Tears of humiliation and hopeless rage pricked at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying was a luxury. It was a weakness she could not afford. The cold water began to feel like it was freezing to her skin, her threadbare tunic offering no protection. She gritted her teeth, the sound of faint grinding in the quiet hall. Her jaw ached with the effort of holding herself together. Slowly, painstakingly, she reached for her rag. She wrung it out with numb, clumsy fingers, and she began to scrub again, her own small, pathetic act of defiance. They could humiliate her. They could starve her and freeze her, but they would not break her, not completely. The fire inside her was a tiny, stubborn ember, but it had not gone out. Not yet. She would endure. It was the only thing she knew how to do. Later, huddled in her tiny alcove in the servants' wing, a space barely larger than a cupboard, she tried to warm herself under a single threadbare blanket. Her tunic was still damp and clung to her like a second skin of ice. Sleep was a distant country she could not reach, her body shivering too hard to allow it. Hunger was a dull, familiar ache in her belly. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the frantic, bird-like beat of her own heart. This was her life. An endless cycle of cold, hunger, and quiet humiliation. Was this all there would ever be? The question was a bitter poison in her mind. She dreamed of warmth, of a full belly, of a kind word. They were fantasies, as distant and unattainable as the moon. The thought was so bleak it almost made her laugh, a harsh, soundless cough of air. Hope was a dangerous thing. It was the cruelest torment of all. Better to expect nothing. Better to feel nothing. She closed her eyes, trying to force her trembling limbs into stillness, and prayed for a dreamless sleep that would at least offer a temporary escape from the waking nightmare of her existence. The next day, the world outside turned white. A blizzard descended upon the mountains with a sudden, unnatural fury. It was not the gentle blanketing of a normal winter storm. This was a screaming vortex of wind and ice that clawed at the thick wooden shutters of the pack hall and howled like a legion of damned souls. The elders muttered amongst themselves, their faces grim. They scanned the churning gray sky, their senses on high alert. This was wrong. This was a storm of dark intent. Inside, the great fire roared, but it seemed to do little to chase away the oppressive chill that seeped through the very stones of the fortress. The pack was restless, their instincts screaming of a threat they could not see. Lyra, however, was merely bored. She was holding court near the fire with a circle of her admirers, including Jorik, a brawny young warrior she was currently favoring. To distract from the storm's oppressive mood, she grew boastful. "The ghost bloom only flowers in the heart of the first true blizzard," she announced, her voice carrying across the hall. "They say its petals hold the essence of winter itself. A warrior brave enough to fetch one would prove his valor beyond any doubt." Her eyes landed pointedly on Jorik. Jorik's bravado wavered. He glanced at the shuttered windows, hearing the violent shriek of the wind. "Lyra, no one could survive out there. It is a death sentence." Lyra's lip curled in a sneer. A coward's excuse. Her gaze swept the hall, landing on Alara, who was quietly clearing away plates from a side table, trying to remain invisible. A cruel idea sparked in Lyra's eyes. "Fine. If my chosen warrior is too afraid, perhaps a worthless Omega can do the job." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Alara. You were so clumsy yesterday spilling that water. You need to make amends. Go, fetch me a ghost bloom from the edge of the Whisperwood." A horrified silence fell over the nearby tables. To send anyone out in this storm was murder. To send the ill-clothed, underfed Omega was a pronouncement of death. Alara's heart stopped. "Please, Lyra," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I will not survive." "That is not my concern," Lyra said coldly, enjoying the power she wielded. "Either you go, or I will have you formally flogged for disobedience. Your choice, little mouse." There was no choice. A flogging in this cold, in her weakened state, would kill her just as surely, but more slowly, more painfully. At least in the storm it would be quick. With all eyes on her, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, Alara turned. She did not have a cloak, only a thin, patched shawl. It would do nothing against the storm's fury. Without another word, she walked to the heavy oak doors. A guard pulled back the thick bolts, his face a mask of grim reluctance. The moment the door cracked open, the wind tore at it, shrieking like a predator. It ripped the breath from Alara's lungs and plastered her thin tunic to her body, the cold instantly sinking its teeth into her. She took a step out into the swirling white chaos, then another. The door boomed shut behind her, sealing her fate. The world was a maelstrom of white. Snow and ice pelted her, sharp as needles, driven by a wind that seemed alive with malice. It sliced through her shawl as if it were not there. Within minutes, she was completely disoriented, the massive shape of the pack hall devoured by the storm. She had no idea which way the whisper would lay. She stumbled forward, driven by some lingering, foolish instinct for survival. The cold was a physical weight, pressing down on her, slowing her limbs. Her feet were numb, her hands clumsy blocks of ice. Her breath plumed in front of her, instantly ripped away by the gale. How could anything be this cold? It felt like the world was ending, frozen in a final, agonizing scream. She tripped over an unseen root and fell hard, her knee twisting under her with a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. Pain, white-hot and blinding, flared up her leg, a shocking contrast to the encroaching numbness of the cold. She cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. She tried to get up, but her leg would not support her. It buckled, sending fresh waves of agony through her. This was it. This was the end. She would freeze to death here, alone in the snow. Just another piece of trash the Grey Fang pack had thrown away. A strange sense of calm washed over her. The fight was over. The endless struggle to endure was finally done. She lay back in the snow, the flakes landing on her face like gentle, cold kisses. The pain in her leg was beginning to dull, and a pleasant drowsiness crept over her. It would be so easy to just close her eyes, so easy to sleep. But then, through the howling wind and the thick curtain of snow, she saw it. A shape, large and dark against the white. It was a wolf. Bigger than any she had ever seen, its fur the color of midnight. It was limping, bleeding from a dozen wounds, its dark blood a stark stain upon the snow. And it was not alone. Circling it were other things. Not wolves. They were fluid and wrong, made of shadow and malice, with eyes that glowed like embers. They darted in and out, their movements jerky and unnatural. The great wolf snapped and snarled, but it was clearly exhausted, weakening with every passing moment. He was being hunted. Fear, sharp and primal, cut through Alara's weary resignation. She should stay hidden. She should let the cold take her quietly. But as she watched the magnificent creature fight its losing battle, another instinct rose up, fierce and inexplicable. It was an instinct not to hide, but to help. What was she doing? This was madness. She was a half-frozen, crippled girl. What could she possibly do against those things? Still, her body moved before her mind could protest. Pushing herself up with her arms, she began to drag herself through the snow, her broken leg a dead weight behind her, a trail of agony in its wake. The shadow creatures noticed her movement. A few of them turned, their glowing red eyes fixing on her. A palpable wave of dread washed from them, a cold that had nothing to do with the blizzard. They hesitated, their shadowy forms wavering as if in confusion. Her presence, so insignificant and broken, was something they had not expected. It threw them off their rhythm. That small hesitation was all the great wolf needed. He lunged, his massive jaws closing around one of the creatures. It dissolved with a faint, oily hiss. but the others renewed their attack, swarming him. He stumbled, a pained growl rumbling in his chest. Alara was closer now, close enough to see the deep gouges in his flank, the exhaustion in his posture. He was going to fall. He was going to die. And the thought sent a pang of sharp, unbearable loss through her. A grief for a creature she had never met. Ignoring the screaming pain in her leg, ignoring the terror that threatened to paralyze her, she reached out a trembling, frost-bitten hand. Her fingers were blue and numb, but she stretched them forward until they brushed against the wolf's matted, blood-soaked fur. The world exploded. It was not a sound, but a feeling. A silent detonation of heat and light erupted from the point of contact. A wave of pure, searing energy blasted outwards, not burning, but cleansing. The shadow creatures shrieked, a sound that was torn from the very fabric of the air, and dissolved into black smoke, banished by the incandescent flash. The blizzard itself seemed to recoil, the wind momentarily silenced, the snow halting in its descent. For Alara, there was only pain. A fire ignited on her skin, just below her collarbone, 1,000 times hotter than any flame. It was an agony so absolute it eclipsed everything else, the cold, her broken leg, her terror. She screamed, a raw, broken sound, as the world dissolved into a sheet of unbearable white light. Through the glare, she saw the wolf changing. Its form twisted and reformed, bones lengthening, fur receding. In its place stood a man. He was immense, broad-shouldered and powerful, his bare torso crisscrossed with wounds that were already beginning to seal. His face was harsh and predatorily beautiful, framed by a mane of black hair dusted with snow. And his eyes were the color of molten gold, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that burned more than the light. She was falling, her consciousness fraying. The last of her strength gave out. Strong arms caught her before she hit the snow, pulling her against a chest that radiated a furnace-like heat. The warmth was a shock, a dizzying pleasure after the endless cold. A voice, deep and resonant as thunder, rumbled through his chest, vibrating against her ear. "You're her." His golden eyes dropped to her shoulder where the fabric of her tunic had been burned away. He gently brushed a thumb over the source of her fading agony. On her skin, a new mark swirled, an intricate, luminous pattern of silver light, like a galaxy trapped beneath her flesh. "Mine," he breathed, the word a vow, a claim, an absolute truth. Her mind, caught between the terror of the unknown and a strange, instinctual feeling of homecoming, could not process it. The man, the light, the mark, the impossible word. It was too much. The edges of her vision turned dark. The last thing she was aware of was the solid, possessive strength of the arms holding her, and the feeling of a safety so profound it felt like a dream. Then, the darkness took her completely. Warmth. That was the first thing she registered. A deep, bone-deep warmth that she had only ever dreamed of. It was in the soft furs piled on top of her and beneath her. It radiated from a small, glowing stone that pulsed with a gentle heat near her cot. She was in a tent, the canvas walls shielding her from a wind that still howled faintly outside. Her leg was splinted, the throbbing pain reduced to a dull, manageable ache. Her tattered, frozen clothes were gone, replaced by a simple but incredibly soft tunic of dark wool that felt like heaven against her skin. She blinked, her mind struggling to catch up. Was this the afterlife? Had she frozen in the snow after all? A movement in the corner of the tent made her jump. He was there, the man from the storm. He sat on a simple stool, watching her, his golden eyes seeming to glow in the dim light. He was dressed now, in dark trousers and a simple tunic that did little to hide the sheer power of his physique. He was not just large. He radiated an aura of ancient authority, a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt threat. Fear, cold and sharp, spiked through her. She tried to scramble back, but a twinge from her leg stopped her with a gasp. "Be still," he said. His voice was calm, yet it held an undeniable command. "You will injure yourself further." He rose and crossed the space in 2 silent strides. He was even bigger up close, a mountain of a man who blocked out the light from the glowing stone. Alara shrank back, pressing herself into the furs, her heart hammering against her ribs. He knelt beside the cot, his movements fluid and graceful, utterly at odds with his size. He did not speak, simply reached for a bowl on a small crate beside her. It was filled with a thick, savory-smelling stew. He held a spoon out to her. Alara stared at the spoon, then at his face. This had to be a trick, a dream. Why would this terrifying, powerful man be trying to feed her? "Eat," he commanded, his voice softer this time, but no less absolute. Her stomach growled, a loud, embarrassing rumble in the quiet tent. She had not eaten a proper meal in 2 days. Hesitantly, her hand trembling, she took the spoon from him. He let her take it, his fingers brushing against hers for a fleeting second. A jolt, like a tiny flicker of the light from the storm, shot up her arm. She flinched. His golden eyes narrowed slightly, watching her reaction with unnerving focus. She ate. The stew was rich with meat and herbs and so wonderfully hot it felt like it was healing her from the inside out. She devoured it like a starving animal, not stopping until the bowl was empty. She was too hungry to be embarrassed. When she was done, he simply took the bowl and replaced it with a mug of warm, spiced cider. She drank that too, the warmth spreading through her veins, chasing out the last vestiges of the deep, cellular cold. Only when she was finished did he speak again. "My name is Kaylin," he said. His gaze was heavy, intense. It felt like he was looking straight through her skin and into her soul. "What is yours?" "Alara," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Alara," he repeated, and the way he said her name made it sound like something precious. "You are safe now." Safe? She had never been safe. She did not know what the word meant, and she certainly did not feel safe with this stranger whose eyes held the fire of a predator. Her instincts were a tangled mess. One part of her, the part that had known a lifetime of fear and abuse, screamed at her to run. But a deeper, more primal part of her, the part that had responded to his touch in the storm, felt an inexplicable pull towards him. It was a sense of rightness, of belonging, that terrified her more than anything. She instinctively put a hand to her collarbone. Through the soft wool, she could feel the faint, raised pattern of the mark. It was still there. It was real. What did you do to me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What is this?" Kaylin's expression was unreadable. "It is a bond," he said simply, as if that explained everything. "A claim. It marks you as mine." Mine. There was that word again. It was not said with the casual cruelty of the Greyfang pack, who owned her labor. This was something else entirely. It was possessive, absolute, and terrifyingly profound. "I don't belong to anyone," she shot back, a flicker of her old, stubborn resilience surfacing. A faint smile touched his lips, a startlingly beautiful expression on his harsh face. It was like watching the sun rise over a winter mountain. "You do now," he said, his voice soft but leaving no room for argument. "You belong to me, and I to you." What was happening to her? Was he mad? She was nothing. A worthless, discarded Omega. He was something else. A king, perhaps, judging by the sheer force of his presence. This made no sense. It was a mistake, a cruel joke. Before she could voice her confusion, he rose. "Rest. I must see to my men. The creatures that attacked us were scouts. Their master will know his plan has failed." His golden eyes swept over her one last time. "I will be back. Do not leave this tent." And with that, he was gone, the tent flap falling shut behind him, leaving her alone with her racing heart and a world that had been turned completely upside down. Meanwhile, the blizzard had begun to abate. Lyra, growing impatient, finally convinced Jorik and 2 other warriors to venture out, not to find Alara, but to recover her body. She could not have the girl's disappearance on her conscience, or, more accurately, she could not have her father, the Alpha, punishing her for so rashly sending a pack servant to her death. They followed the faint trail from the hall, the snow already deep. It was Jorik who found the place first. He stopped dead, his eyes wide. The area was a mess of churned snow and dark, frozen blood. But in the center was a wide, circular patch where the snow was not just melted, but seemed to have been vaporized. The ground beneath it blackened and bare. It radiated a faint, otherworldly energy. "By the great wolf," one of the warriors breathed. "What happened here?" Lyra's eyes scanned the scene. She saw the tracks of a single, massive wolf and the strange, non-lupine tracks of the things it had fought. She saw the small, pathetic trail where Alara had dragged herself, and then she saw something else, glinting in the snow. She bent and picked it up. It was a scrap of rich, dark cloth, torn from a fine tunic. Embroidered on it in silver thread was a sigil, a snarling wolf's head crowned with stars. Jorik gasped, recognizing it instantly. "The Supreme Alpha's crest. That is the mark of Kalin, the Alpha King." Lyra stared at the sigil, her mind racing. The worthless Omega had not died. She had somehow stumbled upon the king himself. And judging by the signs of the fight and the strange melted clearing, something impossible had happened here. An opportunity. A dangerous, thrilling opportunity. Her lips twisted into a sly, venomous smile. She pocketed the scrap of cloth. "It seems," she said, her voice dripping with false concern, "our little Omega has gotten herself into some very serious trouble. We must report this to my father at once." She did not care that Alara had been rescued. She saw only that the lowest of the low had somehow touched the highest of the high. And in that connection, Lyra saw a weapon. A way to elevate her own standing, or, if that failed, a way to destroy the girl who had inexplicably survived her death sentence. She led the warriors back to the hall, her mind already spinning a web of lies and deceit. The worthless Omega had become interesting, and in Lyra's world, to be interesting was to be a target. Kalin was gone for what felt like an eternity. Alara remained in the tent, a prisoner of her own healing body and the bewildering turn of events. His guards, 2 grim-faced warriors who moved with the same silent deadliness as their king, stood sentinel outside. They did not speak to her, but she felt their presence like a wall, penning her in. She touched the mark on her collarbone again. The skin was smooth, not scarred, yet the intricate pattern was undeniably there. a swirl of pale silver against her flesh. When she focused on it, she could feel a faint, warm thrumming, like a distant heartbeat that was not her own. It was his. The bond. It was real. A part of her, the part that had been starved for any kind of connection her entire life, was drawn to that feeling. It was a thread of warmth in the vast, cold emptiness of her existence. But the rational part of her mind, the part that had learned survival through fear, was screaming. This was ownership, a brand. She had traded one cage for another, perhaps one even more dangerous. A commotion outside the tent snapped her out of her thoughts. She heard voices, one of them sharp and commanding, a voice she knew all too well. Alpha Boren, Lyra's father. Her blood ran cold. What was he doing here? The tent flap was thrown open. Alpha Boren stood there, his face a mask of false, fatherly concern. Behind him were a dozen of his best warriors and a smirking Lyra. "Alara, my child," Boren boomed, stepping inside. "Thank the spirits you are safe." Kaelin's guards moved to block his path, their hands on the hilts of their swords. "The king gave orders. No one is to enter," the larger one growled. Boren held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Of course not. I would not dream of disobeying the Alpha King. He sent me himself. He was called away on urgent business and charged me with escorting the girl back to the safety of our pack hall until his return. She is one of mine, after all." It was a plausible lie. Too plausible. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked from Boren's oily smile to Lyra's triumphant sneer. This was a trap. "No," Alara said, her voice small but firm. He said I was to wait for him here." Boren's eyes hardened. "Do not be foolish, girl. You will come with me. It is the king's will." He nodded to his men. Kaelin's guards drew their blades. "She stays." But they were only two. Boren's warriors surged forward. It was over in seconds. The guards were skilled, but they were overwhelmed, disarmed, and bound before they could mount a real defense. Boren had not come to negotiate. Two of his men grabbed Alara, hauling her from the cot. Pain shot up her leg as they jostled her, but she barely noticed. A wave of pure terror washed over her. "No, please!" They dragged her from the warmth and safety of the tent out into the cold. The blizzard had passed, but the air was still frigid. As they pulled her away, the faint, warm thrumming from the mark on her collarbone began to change. The warmth leached away, replaced by a sharp, biting cold, an aching void that grew with every step they took away from Kaelin's camp. It was a physical pain, a tearing sensation deep in her soul. They did not take her back toward the Greyfang pack hall. They turned in the opposite direction, heading deeper into the jagged, snow-choked peaks of the mountains. The hope that had flickered within her died, replaced by the cold, hard certainty of betrayal. Hours later, they arrived at a ruin. The crumbling stones of an ancient fortress stood black against the snow, radiating an aura of profound malevolence. This place was old, and it was evil. They dragged her inside, down winding stairs into the frozen bowels of the earth. The chamber they threw her into was hewn from black rock. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and decay, and waiting in the center of the room was a figure cloaked in shadow. The very sight of him making the soul-deep cold of the broken bond even worse. His eyes were not the ember she had seen in his minions, but 2 points of chilling, intelligent darkness. This was Malachor, the Shadow King, the master of the creatures from the storm. "So," Malachor's voice was a dry rustle, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. This is the king's great weakness, a broken little omega. Boren bowed low. As promised, my lord, the conduit. Alara's mind reeled. Conduit? What did they mean? Malakor's shadowy form drifted closer. He raised a hand, and spectral chains of glowing, sickly purple energy snaked out, wrapping around her wrists and ankles. Where they touched her, they did not burn with heat, but with a soul-freezing cold. She cried out as the energy washed over her, and the faint connection to Kaelin, already strained, was dampened almost to nothing. The ache of its absence was a torment beyond words. It felt like a part of her had been amputated. The bond is a fascinating piece of magic, Malachor mused, circling her. A link between two souls, a source of immense strength for an alpha king and his chosen mate. But a link can transmit pain as easily as it transmits power. A link, he paused, his dark eyes glinting, can be corrupted. He leaned in, his presence so vile it made her want to vomit. Kaelin has been a thorn in my side for centuries. He is too powerful to face directly, even when wounded. But you are the key. Through you, I will not just sever his bond. I will turn it into a siphon. I will drain his life force, his alpha power, through you, until he is a hollow, powerless shell. And then I will kill him. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow, a tool, a weapon to be used against Kaelin, the man who had saved her, the man whose presence had felt like the sun after a lifetime of winter. The old, familiar litany of her worthlessness echoed in her head, now given a new and terrible voice by Malachor. She was not just nothing. She was a flaw, a poison, a walking, breathing death sentence for the only person who had ever shown her a shred of kindness. Despair, absolute and suffocating, crushed her. Malachor was right. She was a curse. Her very existence would be the end of him. The tiny ember of hope she had dared to nurture was extinguished, drowned in an ocean of self-loathing. Tears finally fell, freezing on her cheeks, each one a testament to her own catastrophic failure. She had been found, only to become the instrument of her savior's destruction. Huddled in the crushing darkness of the cell, chained by magic and despair, she felt the last flicker of the bond. It was a faint, cold spark in a universe of pain. It was all she had left of him. Closing her eyes, she focused on that spark with everything she had. She did not know what she was doing, only that she had to try. She pushed all of her terror, her despair, her desperate warning into that tiny connection. He's going to kill you. Through me. Run. Stay away. She expected nothing. Silence. The void. But then, something answered. It was not a voice of words. It was a feeling, crashing back along the thread of the bond with stunning force. It was not fear. It was rage. A cataclysmic, world-breaking fury that was so immense it momentarily silenced her own despair. It was the rage of a king whose most precious treasure had been stolen. It was followed by a wave of pure, unbending determination, a promise forged in the heart of a star. And then, a whisper. So faint it was more thought than sound, a single thread of warmth in the suffocating cold. Hold on. The whisper echoed in the deepest part of her soul. I am coming. The ritual began. Malachor and a cabal of his Ember Covenant followers stood in a circle around her, their chanting a low, guttural drone that vibrated in her bones. The sickly purple light of the spectral chains intensified, sinking cold, venomous tendrils into her. Pain, sharp and horrifying, lanced through her as the dark magic took hold, twisting the very nature of the bond. She could feel it happening. The bond, which had once been a conduit for warmth and a sense of belonging, was being forcibly inverted. It was becoming a siphon, and through it, she felt him. She felt Kalen. Not his presence, but his strength. She could feel it being pulled from him across the miles, a distant, agonizing drain that was mirrored in the torment of her own body. He was weakening. The ritual was working. A guttural cry of pain was torn from her throat. It was not just her pain, it was his, echoed through the corrupted link between them. Malachor laughed, a dry, rasping sound of triumph. Yes, feel his power dwindle. Feel the great Alpha King brought low by a pathetic Omega. Suddenly, the entire chamber shook. A deafening crash, like a thunderclap from hell, blew the ancient stone doors at the top of the stairs off their hinges. Dust and debris rained down. The chanting faltered. And then he was there, framed in the ruined doorway, silhouetted against the light from the upper fortress, stood Kalen. He was no longer the calm, watchful man from the tent. This was the Alpha King in his full, unrestrained fury. His eyes were not molten gold, but blazing silver fire, burning with a light that seemed to cast its own shadows. He was a tempest of righteous wrath given form. Malachor! His voice was not a shout. It was a roar that shook the very foundations of the ruin. Behind him, his warriors poured into the narrow stairwell, their blades singing as they met the cultists of the Ember Covenant. The chamber erupted into a maelstrom of steel and shadow, the clang of swords mixing with the screams of the dying. Kalen did not hesitate. He moved like a bolt of lightning, a blur of motion carving a path directly toward Alara. He cut down 2 cultists who tried to stop him without even seeming to slow. His focus was entirely on her, his silver eyes a promise of rescue and retribution. But Malachor was prepared. He gestured, and his elite guard, hulking brutes cloaked in shadow magic, moved to intercept their king. Kalen met them head-on, a whirlwind of destruction. His sword was a silver streak, his fists like hammers. He was magnificent. He was terrifying. But the ritual was still active. Alara could feel his strength being leached away with every passing second, fueling the dark magic that held her. She watched in horror as he fought, seeing the slight hesitation in his movements, the strain on his face. He was powerful, but they were many, and Malachor's spell was a poison in his veins. He dispatched another shadow guard but staggered, dropping to one knee with a sharp intake of breath. His silver eyes flickered, the light in them dimming for a fraction of a second. Seeing Kalen stumble, seeing the triumphant, hateful sneer that spread across Malachor's face, something inside Alara broke. It was not a collapse into despair. It was a shattering of chains. The years of being called worthless, the lifetime of abuse, the biting humiliation, the soul-crushing despair of the last few hours, it all coalesced into a single, defining point of incandescent rage. It was not his life they were stealing. It was hers. It was not his future they were destroying. It was hers. He had found her. He had called her his, and these monsters were trying to take it all away. No. The word was a silent detonation in her soul. She screamed. It was not a sound of pain or fear. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated power. a sound that came from the very core of her being. A blinding torrent of light erupted from her. It was not the purple of Malicor's dark magic, but a pure, brilliant silver white, the color of starlight and creation. The light was not hot. It was a wave of absolute purity, a soul-deep fire that burned away only darkness. The spectral chains holding her vaporized into nothingness. The cultists closest to her screamed as the light washed over them, their bodies dissolving into ash and smoke. The entire ritual shattered. The wave of light slammed into Malicor, throwing him back against the far wall of the chamber with the force of a battering ram. It washed over Kalen, and he gasped as the draining sensation vanished, replaced by a surge of warmth and returning strength. He looked at Alara, his silver eyes wide with stunned awe. The light receded, coalescing around Alara, swirling about her like a cloak of living stars. She stood, her broken leg forgotten, her body suffused with a power she had never known she possessed. She felt whole. Malicor staggered to his feet, his shadowy form flickering and unstable, wounded by the pure light. He stared at her, his dark eyes wide with disbelief and fury. "Impossible. You are nothing. A flaw. A worthless Omega." Alara took a step forward. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold stone. The light swirled around her, responding to her will. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the timid whisper of the ghost of Greyfang. It was clear, resonant, and ringing with an unshakable power that silenced the remaining sounds of battle. "I was never nothing," she declared, her eyes locking with his. "You were just too blind to see." She raised a hand. The starlight around her gathered at her palm, forming a sphere of concentrated, brilliant light. "This is who I am." She thrust her hand forward. A beam of pure soul light shot across the chamber and struck Malicor square in the chest. He let out a final, agonizing shriek as the light consumed him, not burning his body, but unmaking his very essence. His shadowy form dissolved, turning to motes of fading darkness that winked out of existence, leaving nothing behind. In the corner of the chamber, Alpha Boran and Lyra cowered, their faces masks of abject terror. They had come to see a king fall. Instead, they had witnessed the birth of a queen. Silence descended upon the chamber, thick and absolute. The battle was over. The last of the Ember Covenant cultists had been slain by Kalen's warriors, who now stood watching her, their expressions a mixture of shock and reverence. But Alara only had eyes for one person. Kalen crossed the room in 2 long, powerful strides. He did not hesitate, did not question. He simply reached for her, pulling her into an embrace so tight it stole her breath. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his body trembling slightly with the aftermath of the battle and the sheer, overwhelming relief. One of his hands tangled in her hair, the other pressed against her back, holding her to him as if he was afraid she might fade away like the light she commanded. "I have you," he breathed, the words a ragged whisper against her skin. It was not a claim of ownership now, but a statement of profound, desperate fact. He had her back. She was safe. She sagged against him, the incredible power that had filled her receding, leaving behind a deep, humming warmth and an exhausted ache. She wrapped her own arms around his neck, holding on just as tightly. The solid, living reality of him was an anchor in the swirling storm of what had just happened. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. His eyes, now faded from silver fire back to their warm, molten gold, searched hers. His thumb gently stroked her cheek. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she could not name. Awe, gratitude, something deeper. "You found me," she whispered in return, a tear of relief tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. It was the simplest, most fundamental truth of her new reality. He had seen her when no one else had. He had come for her. As he gazed at her, his eyes dropped to the mark on her collarbone. It was glowing, a soft, silvery pulse against her skin, beating in time with her heart. As he watched, mesmerized, the light flared. A matching, ethereal mark of swirling silver light bloomed into existence over his heart, shining through the rips in his tunic. It was not a brand burned into his skin, but a manifestation of pure light, a mirror image of her own mark. Kaelin gasped softly, his hand flying to his chest. He could feel it. The bond, no longer a one-way claim from him to her, had just become a circuit. She had, in her own way, claimed him back. It was complete, perfect, unbreakable. A bond of equals forged in darkness and sealed in light. He looked back at her, his golden eyes shimmering. "Mine," he said again, but this time the word held a new meaning. It meant protection. It meant devotion. It meant forever. "Yours," she affirmed, her voice steady. For the first time, the word did not feel like a chain, but a promise. Weeks later, Alara stood on a high balcony carved from silver-veined white stone. Before her, a city of elegant spires and graceful bridges unfolded down the mountainside, bathed in the warm light of a rising sun. The air was clean and crisp, scented with pine and the promise of a new day, not the oppressive damp and decay of the Greyfang Hall. She was no longer in rags. A gown of deep blue silk, soft as a whisper, draped her form. Her hair, once lank and uncared for, was clean and shining, braided with fine silver ribbons. The lingering ache in her leg was gone, healed completely by Kaelin's royal physics. She was no longer the ghost of Greyfang. She was not even sure who she was yet, but she knew she was not that frightened, invisible girl anymore. Strong arms wrapped around her waist from behind, pulling her back against a familiar, solid chest. Kaelin rested his chin on her shoulder, his warmth a comforting presence at her back. "You are thinking so loudly I can hear it from across the room," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She smiled, a small, genuine expression that still felt new on her face. "I was just thinking, I have never seen a sunrise like this." "There will be thousands more," he promised. "For you, for us." He had brought her here, to his citadel, the heart of his vast kingdom. He had explained everything, about fated mates, a connection so rare it had become legend, about how he had felt her, a faint flicker in the world, for years, and had been searching for her. About her own power, the lost magic of the soul light, a gift of creation and purity not seen in his lineage for 1,000 years, believed to be extinct. She was not an Omega but a dormant queen, her power suppressed by the misery of her upbringing. He had presented her to his people. He had stood before his court, his hand holding hers, and introduced her not just as his mate, but as their Luna Queen, Alara of the Light. The awe and respect on their faces was something she was still getting used to. The fate of the Greyfang pack had been swift and just. Kaelin's justice was as absolute as his love. Alpha-born and Lyra, their treachery exposed, were stripped of their titles and exiled to the desolate wastes, a fate worse than death. The pack was placed under the stewardship of a new, honorable Alpha, who answered directly to the king. Kaelin's lips brushed against the side of her neck, then moved to gently kiss the silver mark on her collarbone, which still pulsed with a faint, steady light. "My queen," he whispered, the title a soft caress. Alara leaned back against his strength, her hand covering his on her waist. She watched the golden light of the dawn spread across the mountains and valleys of her new home. All her life, she had been told she was broken, worthless, too damaged to ever be wanted. She had been a ghost, a shadow, a thing to be used and discarded. But she was not broken. She had just been waiting for the one person in the world who could see the light hidden within her darkness, waiting for the one whose soul was tuned to hers. He called her his to mend. But he had not mended her. He had not fixed a broken thing. He had simply held her and loved her and given her the safety to finally become who she was always meant to be. And here, in his arms, watching the sun claim the sky, Alara finally, truly, felt like she was home.